What to do, what to do. This is the Brothers on Book podcast where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. As always, I'm Alex, and is with me is my co-host Jack from, I would assume, still sunny Vienna. Is that right, Jack?
Yeah, I'm in Vienna. Hard to believe.
Yeah. As always, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. Also, a great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along to them. So I guess we have a great book this week. We didn't have a teaser last week because we were not ready for it. But this week we are doing the classic Economics in One Lesson by the late great Henry Hazlitt. So Jack, you want to do the author blurb today?
Sure. So Henry Hazlitt was an American journalist who wrote about business and economics, and he was in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, The Nation, the American Mercury, and the New York Times. He is widely cited in libertarian and conservative circles. I hope that doesn't, deter some of our listeners on the left. I do think it's important to listen and read many points of view, so you're not just listening to the same people, in your echo chamber all the time. So he was born in 1894, grew up in relative poverty, and his father died when he was young, kind of rough upbringing. And he didn't die until 1993, so he lived almost 100 years, and he got to see so many things. So he was actually in the Army service in World War I, and he actually went through a pandemic in the Spanish flu in 1918, which infected a third of the world's population at the time. And that's almost crazy to think about in percentages when we're comparing to what we're seeing with coronavirus. Last I checked, I think it was less than 1% of the world's population. And so the Spanish flu in 1918 was a third of the population got infected. It's just crazy.
I think the death rate was really high for that one as well, correct?
That I'm not sure. I know it affected, I think, more middle-aged people. It wasn't so deadly on the older population.
Yeah, it was the 20 to 40-year-olds that were really, I think, killed, which is what made it so devastating to the workforce.
Yeah. So after Spanish flu 1918, early 1920s, he became a financial editor to the New York Evening Mail and further refined his economics understanding by having discussions with former Harvard economics professor Benjamin Anderson. And so he started there, and then I guess in the early 1920s, he would also have seen the Weimar Republic hyperinflation following World War I, when Germany couldn't repay their debts and resulted to the money printing. So, and then he got to see World War II, and then this book came out in 1946. So yeah, that's a brief background on Henry Hazlitt. Al, what'd you think right after you finished reading this one?
I thought, honestly, wow, this is incredible. You just spoke about echo chambers, and to an extent, this book sort of, I for the most part have always sort of thought that the government is very inefficient, and when it gets into things, it sort of muddles them up. And after reading this, that just verified all of my own internal thoughts, and pretty much the entire book, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, is him going through point by point and how when the government involves themselves in the markets or with prices, it in actuality hurts citizens, destroys the true price, and just sort of makes a mirage of what things should actually cost, either more expensive or less expensive, usually hindering the large population for the benefit of a single group. That was sort of my thoughts. So it just sort of reaffirmed all of my own personal beliefs. I guess how did you feel?
I was, an econ major in college. I did, while I was reading it, I mean, he didn't draw like supply and demand curves, but I found myself drawing a lot of supply and demand curves, like in each chapter, and like drawing lines and shifts and putting, price floors and ceilings. And so I kind of enjoyed it from that way. It was kind of like a review in that respect. And, it kind of got me thinking about other things I had read and heard, and I guess I'll touch on it a little more a little later. But yeah, but I was also thinking, our American economy isn't quite as free as maybe one might think. I mean, in relation to other places, it might be more, but it's still got a lot of government involvement that caters to one part of the population. And I kind of find it odd that, many quote unquote, like capitalists, like they seem against price fixing virtually everything in the economy. But when it comes to like inflation and interest rates, they kind of just take it as is and not as the government also intervening in the price of our currency. And it's probably because a lot of those people benefit from it. So, I guess with that, we want to go through some chapters.
Oh, well, I think
or
we hit
you want to.
our ad first.
Okay.
So pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of all. Pickleball is the fastest growing leisure sport in the United States. It is a mix between tennis and table tennis. However, don't let the average age of participant in this sport fool you. The game has fierce competition and only the will of a champion can thrive. Go buy some paddles and balls and play pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of. I'd also like to say, I'm making my inaugural debut tomorrow, actually, in a singles tournament in pickleball.
Nice.
I'm pretty nervous. I'm playing in the open division, and I'm not entirely sure how this is gonna go. So
Where are you going for that? What's the city?
Jackson, Tennessee.
Jackson, Tennessee. Okay.
We'll see how it goes.
And your fantasy football team is playing mine, I believe, starting tonight.
Is that true?
Yeah, we're playing.
I should probably check. Who's playing tonight? What game is playing tonight?
I actually don't know.
I'm glad to see that we're both up to date.
Yeah.
So I think we were each gonna pick out for this episode. We were just gonna pick out 2 chapters and just sort of go through them. So the first chapter that I sort of found interesting was this chapter on, do unions really raise wages? So I guess growing up, you always hear about how, at least in the early 1900s, how workers were essentially abused and how employers were evil and they exploited their workers. And then unions came in and sort of switched that, and they gave workers, living wages or raised wages and increased, sort of working conditions. So Henry Hazlitt looks over and he comes to the conclusion, and he has the thesis is, can labor unions substantially raise real wages over the long run and for the whole working populations? This is his thesis, and he comes to the conclusion that this is actually false. And I think if you went and asked most people in unions, does your union raise your wages? I think in an individual person, they may say yes, but he's looking at over the entire population of all the workers. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion he comes to is that in actuality, the answer is no. And I think we'll get into it later, but he actually comes to the conclusion that in many regards, unions potentially lower the real wages.
I guess, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess what were you going to say?
I mean, I guess when I think of union, one of the things that come to comes to my mind are like the sports unions. And I guess it's, I don't know if other people feel this, but I guess the people that are really, really good, they probably don't want to be in unions because it kind of caps probably what they can make, right?
Oh yeah, he actually does sort of. I mean, he brings up that point is that a lot of times unions will promote not based on meritocracy, but based on seniority. So
Yeah.
it's even if you're younger and better, you're not necessarily getting a raise over someone who is older and worse.
Yeah, because I mean, I would imagine like even like LeBron James, he's probably in terms of his actual wage from basketball, he's probably the most underpaid athlete on the planet because he's because if they opened it up, the union basically puts there's like a minimum pay, right, for like a lot of these athletes. Like there's a minimum amount you can pay them. So
That is
so
correct. Yeah.
so if they took that floor off and took well, I guess it's more of the salary cap maybe with LeBron James, but like basically if they took that floor off for the minimum, you would have a lot more players that would agree to work for less. So you're kind of denying some people some work.
Yeah. So that sort of actually that statement sort of goes into one of the I think earlier chapters about his opinions on minimum wage laws, right?
Yeah, true.
Which
Yeah, I guess that's more of what I'm. Yeah, yeah. Now you say it.
which
Yeah.
is that if you remove I mean if you remove the minimum wage, you'll have an increase in people coming into the workforce. I mean, I don't really know what I mean. Do you know what LeBron James makes?
I mean, I guess it's a lot, but I'm sure it's not enough. It's not what he's really worth. But I guess that's more of the salary cap. I guess that's not really. I don't know. I actually don't know how the union in the NBA, but I know there's like a veteran minimum. Like they have like a
Yeah, that
minimum.
that,
So
that is true.
I guess that has more to do with the minimum wage part. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to start, he's not saying that unions are necessarily bad, and he does concede that unions do serve some useful purposes, which is that unions have gotten workers working in better working conditions, so employers just uh, can't just exploit their health or have them in poor working conditions. So he does say that is a very useful benefit. And then the other thing he says is that the main purpose of the union is to get you the worker the really the average market value of whatever your job is. So if the average market value of your job is like, well, at the point of this book being written, I don't know, like $20 a week, then the union's going to get that for you, regardless of whether or not you're worth it.
mm-hmm.
He does then further point out that there is an inherent sort of power dynamic between a worker and an employer, in that if you, the worker, refuse a job because you think you can go get another job that has it's higher paying for your work, and you're wrong, and you can't get another job, you may be facing dire consequences because you then don't have an income, can't support yourself, can't support your family, can't eat. Where if the employer doesn't hire you, they can probably go find another person that will do the work. So there is an inherent power dynamic between the employer and the employee during the hiring, and that the employer does have a little bit more power. And in that regard, he does say unions are useful. But Howard, he then sort of goes, and he just sort of goes and shows that how unions have now. So in the beginning, things were too far to the employers, and he's now going through and talking about how things have now shifted too far to sort of the employees. I mean, and you have to remember this book was written in 1946, and it seems like things have, sort of what you were saying, have further gone too far for the employees. And he even says it as easy as experience has proved for unions, particularly with the help of one-sided labor legislation, which put compulsory sole on employers. So laws have been, for the most part, pushed forward on the basis for employees against employers. So this is making it, as he then shows, this is making it more expensive to hire people, and it's making it more expensive to hire people and actually harder, because now the employees or the employers are responsible for the employees, and this brings them into, they can be sued. So as I'm sure you can imagine, the effect of this is that what happens is it becomes more difficult to hire people, and that, so if it's more difficult to hire people, you have higher unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
So really what he comes about is that when the unions sort of unionize and work for the employees, they make it essentially harder to hire people, and then you have less people hired. The other thing he talks about is that when unions ask for increased wages, it's sort of the same thing. When you're getting each individual worker increased wages, it's just not possible, because he says that the true value of any worker is based on productivity and essentially sales.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you're saying that people should be paid more doesn't actually mean that they should be paid more. It's solely based off your productivity. So if you're bringing in, if you, the employee, are bringing in $20 a week, and you're probably, paid whatever, like $15 a week, then there's $5 in profits. Just because your union is demanding that you be paid $25 a week, the employer can't do that. You're losing them money. So just because they demand that you pay them more doesn't mean that you're actually worth more.
Well, I guess it also, so if they did get paid more, they could, the employer could just pass along that increased cost to, they could put it into the product that they're selling.
Right.
And then the problem, I guess, with that is then the people that are buying it have less when they go to purchase. So you're kind of just, yeah.
That is actually the end result conclusion he draws, that when you as a union demand higher wages and the employer has to give them to you, the only true option they have is to send that cost along to the consumer. And what happens is you then shift that supply and demand curve. So then you have less people buying the goods. So what happens is, the actual employer then has to draw back, because they're not, their profits then go down because they're not selling as much, and you end up laying off more people, so you have unemployment rise again in this generic situation. So he says that in the long run, if you're doing this, you would actually be better off not raising wages, because what would happen is that you would allow the company to expand and be able to hire more people.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing he says, the other interesting point, is that I guess at one point, union dues were forced to provide their own unemployment sort of insurance, sort of like how we have unemployment for the government.
Mm-hmm.
And when unions were forced to do this, unions rarely demanded an increase in wages for their workers, because they realized that if they just demanded an increase in wages, that would lead to a higher rate of unemployment. So they would have to pay out more of the unemployment. As soon as, unemployment was coming from the government, they didn't care, because they didn't have to cover for it. Sort of an interesting point.
Okay.
So, that was the main. He goes into sort of like a theoretical this actually he sort of ties it in on the next chapter I'm talking about is inflation, and he kind of ties it in a little bit into inflation, where, you know, he says, let's consider like six groups of workers. So he constitutes farmhands, retail store workers, workers in clothing and trade, coal miners, building workers, and railway employees. Now he just sort of determines like if each of those six groups had a union and they demanded a raise in wages, like percentage wise. And, you know, he gave it as, you know, group one, the farmer hands, received no true wage increase. And then each subsequent group rate gave like a 10%. So group two got 10% increase in wages. Group three got 20, going up to 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much what he shows is that what would happen there is that you would then have a subsequent increase in inflation. And all that would happen is that you had a 20%, 25% overall increase in inflation in the price of goods. And what happens is you have half of those groups, you know, the groups that got 30%, 40%, 50% increase in wages would benefit, but they would not benefit nearly as much as they think. And then the other groups, even though they think they're getting an increase in wages, are actually more poor because their buying power is going down.
Yeah, because it's all relative to what everyone else can get.
Right.
Yeah.
That was for the most part. I mean, that was, you know, like anything, I think people should go and, you know, read this themselves and, you know, come to their own conclusions and, you know, sort of check this. But that was for the most part really all I had. He does talk a little bit about strikes and the purpose of strikes and the picketing. And he says that, you know, strikes, so strikes are good if no one else is willing to work. If you're running a strike and no one else is willing to work, the conclusion he kind of draws is that means that you're justified. Because if you're running a picketing strike and no one else is willing to come in and work at the wages you were provided, that means you truly were below your
the market value.
Your value.
Yeah.
But as soon as other people are willing to come in and work, that means that they were really paying you the market value and you're just sort of greedy. Is sort of the conclusion he came to. And he said that in that fact that people aren't picketing the company, they're picketing the replacements. Sort of interesting point.
Replacements.
Yeah, they're sort of out there not to picket the company, but to intimidate the new workers coming in, to try and stop them from coming in.
I see.
I guess an interesting point.
Yeah, because they don't want people agreeing to do their job because they think they're underpaid.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that was really all I had for that chapter. I mean, I thought it was good. Definitely not. Definitely made me think. Is like, you know, definitely made me think about it. Something I've never been part of a union. I don't know. Do you have a union? I would assume not. No. Okay.
But it's I was thinking about like the Society of Actuaries kind of, because they do. I mean, they do conduct surveys, so you know, like the averages of what people are paid. Like for, you know, X years of experience and Y exams passed, you kind of have a feel for what other people are paid. But I suppose, I mean, if you were an exceptional worker, you'd still be able, if you could show, you know, you're worth a certain amount, or you've made the company, you know, this many dollars, that maybe you should get a raise. So, but yeah, it's not a union.
I mean, I would say every, you know, probably about, well, for the listeners that don't know, I'm currently a graduate student, and about once every year, you know, I get an email from some disgruntled graduate student wanting the graduate students to unionize, which just, you know, about once a year I read the email and I chuckle because I think it's ridiculous. But, you know, yeah, I mean, it sort of does go back like to sort of what you were saying about price floors, which is that if I wasn't guaranteed, if there wasn't just a generic salary for graduate students, would I be able to negotiate for a higher salary for my work? Like, I mean, do I think I'm better than some of the other, I mean, my first year coming into graduate school, I had a lot of experience, much more than most of my peers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably safe to say my first year of graduate school, I was probably more productive and probably a better worker than my peers, because I wasn't, just figuring things out for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say I mean, I would say I probably deserve more money, but I didn't get more money.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it's about all I got on that chapter.
Okay. Let's see here. So let's see here. So chapter 14, I mean, a lot of these chapters kind of overlap, like they kind of analyze like how, when you're trying to like plug a hole in one part of the economy, you're kind of taken from other people. And chapter 14 was about, it was called Saving the X Industry. So like there's lobbyists that work for these different industries, and, they'll say, the X industry is sick. The X industry is dying. It must be saved. And it kind of got me thinking, well, what industries have we seen in our lifetime that have kind of gone under? And if we had tried to prop them up, what would really happen? So like, I was kind of thinking of video rentals. So like, we used to go to Blockbuster all the time. And I guess there's like a couple video rentals that are still around, but I mean, Blockbuster was huge. So, I mean, we used to go with, mom and dad all the time and pick out those, those VHS tapes because, they were cheap. But, they have storefronts, and, and Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix, but they didn't. And I was trying to think like, well, if lobbyists or if someone said like, Blockbuster must be saved, like, so like what kind of would happen? I mean, we'd basically be paying, more in taxes to prop them up, while, Netflix is, waiting in the wing. And, I mean, they kind of talked about like, well, what if we would have artificially kept the horse and buggy around? Like it would have taken away from those workers that might have made contributions in like the car and transportation. And then like, who knows, like space programs, if we would have just kept the horse and buggy around just for the sake of keeping them around. And he kind of goes to saying like, overall, like the dying industry should be allowed to die, just like the growing industry should be allowed to grow. He did say like there's two he talked through two ways of kind of protecting, the X industry. And one was to say that, this market's overcrowded, and to try to prevent other companies from entering. And he kind of went through and said, well, it could be actually overcrowded. And if it is overcrowded, then, I mean, people aren't really going to enter. It would be like, we look at rental houses like a lot. So if like one area, like where we were buying and then renting, if the house prices just kept going up and up and up, like the rent ratios might not work and we wouldn't enter. Like it actually would be like overcrowded. But he was saying, if you keep them out just for the sake of keeping them out, you're really depriving the capital and labor from going into those industries, and you're kind of forcing you are forcing investors to place their money in industries that they view as less promising. So that's not good. And then the other argument he brought up was, we could just protect them by giving them a direct subsidy from the government. And he kind of talks, this is basically just a transfer from, the rest to this X industry, because taxpayers then have less money because they're propping up industry X. They're spending less money on other industries, which makes those other industries smaller on average. And he had a line in here that was pretty good. The idea that an expanding economy implies that all industries must be simultaneously expanding is a profound error. But there was one story so when we were back home in March during lockdown, when it started, or maybe in April, we went on those drives in the morning. And I think there was a Planet Money episode that explained how, I think it was Norway. They either put a subsidy on salmon production or some sort of like price floor. So basically there was a lot of people that went into salmon catching. And what happened was they ended up having a surplus of salmon. And what Norway thought to do is they went around to these countries and tried to shop the salmon. And in Japan, before Norway brought them, there was no sushi of salmon, because in Japan, salmon was not eaten raw. And basically Norway introduced raw salmon to Japan. So I know he says that surpluses aren't good, but I was trying to think of an example of when a surplus might be good in the long term. And this was the one thing I could think of. I don't know if it still would have been introduced to Japan, or if Japan would have eventually started eating it. But this new demand for raw salmon was introduced basically because Norway had a surplus. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, an idea.
Well, I guess that doesn't that go back to sort of one of the main points of this book is that if you wouldn't have had the surplus, like if you wouldn't have had this floor ceiling or the price ceiling, mm-hmm. you wouldn't have had all these people enter the salmon industry.
That's true.
Right. So if you don't have all these people enter the salmon industry, you don't have the surplus. So they would go do something else. So you have no way of knowing what they would have done with their labor. So you don't know what they would have created. The only thing you see is that you got salmon in Japan.
But I think it's also like it kind of unlocked this demand that Japan and the rest of the world didn't even know existed. Because
so
it's kind of when I started, I don't know, I know it goes against what the book is kind of saying, and it's kind of against what I believe in, but it was an example where I was like, wow. So like and it was kind of forced because the Norwegian government had to think of something because they had so much extra fish.
Right. But I guess the point is like, you don't know, you can't possibly know where that labor would have gone. I mean, that labor could have went into like some, other great thing. Like, I don't know. It could have went into anything. So you just don't know what you've lost out on. But you know that you got, salmon in Japan. I mean, I like salmon sushi. Salmon in Japan is probably good, but you don't know what you didn't get, I guess. Mm-hmm. Is what I'm saying.
I guess I was just trying to think because like these countries, because I mean, you can say like less government is good, but we have countries, like there's different countries that operate differently. So, and if they are intervening in some way, I don't know. It's just, but like, what is the point of a country to begin with? So, I mean, we could open up everything and there could be no, you live in this country, you live in that country, because that's basically what we would have to do to kind of go with what he's kind of pitching, right? Because we basically need no government.
Well, no, not necessarily, just no government intervention. You're talking about like, free trade?
Yeah, we would need that.
Well, why? Well, we would need free trade, but why would we not need individual governments for that? We just would have to not impose any tariffs on other countries.
I guess. Yeah. But I mean, but what is the point of government, I guess? I don't know. We're kind of going down a rabbit hole here.
I mean, are you asking me what my opinion of the point of government is? To provide the bare necessity to the citizens to provide a happy and healthy life, which does not include, entering markets to sort of manipulate the prices or to benefit one group over another. It's just to sort of get out of the way and let people, you need some regulation, obviously, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it just, it gets kind of iffy when you start talking about like education is for kids or, because you kind of want to,
sure.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Okay, what next? What chapter are you going to do next?
So the next chapter I'm doing is the Mirage of Inflation, and it's just as I read this, I thought it was incredible that this was written in 1946, where this is still today very prevalent. So what is inflation? I guess, Jack, I guess my normal definition is inflation is, when you increase the money supply. I guess, would you have a different definition?
I mean, I would say just your money is losing value. I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So it's sort of just saying the same thing in different way, right?
Maybe. Yeah.
So the thing he points out is that let me see if I can actually find the actual. Well, I'm not finding the actual quote, but the point he points out, the problem he points out with inflation is that people tend to confuse sort of money and wealth. So, money, people tend to think that if you just have more money, you have more wealth. When he says real wealth, of course, is, measured in sort of like what you can produce or what you can buy. So, he defines it as what is produced and consumed, the food we eat, the clothes we wear. I would just say real wealth consists of like what your true buying power at any given time is.
I kind of like Kiyosaki talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what's
Right.
the difference between rich and wealthy? Like, rich, like you can have a lot of money, but like if you stop working, like you're gonna run out of money. But like the wealthy, you kind of measure in time and like how much. Like, could you just stop working your normal job and would you still have money coming in? How long could you last? Wealth is kind of measured in time.
Yeah. So, I mean, Kiyosaki to me is measuring it more. Real wealth is more of like a passive income type stream, where I guess Hazlitt is sort of denoting it in terms of like actually,
Buying
like
power.
if you have and just true buying power. Like if you have $100 and a hamburger costs $1, you can buy 100 hamburgers. Maybe you feel wealthy, like that's 100 meals. Versus if you had $200 and a hamburger costs $10, you would have more money, but you would have less wealth. Which I think in that scenario you can only buy 20 hamburgers.
Yeah.
And assuming the hamburgers are the same, I think everyone would assume or agree that 100 hamburgers is better than 20.
Yeah, that's why actually. So I have a blog where I keep track of my net worth, and I started. Instead of doing it in dollars, I measure it also now in gold and Bitcoin. So it's not, because we get in this habit of just looking at the nominal dollar amount instead of like what it actually gets you.
Right, very, very, very true. So this sort of comes in this sort of conflation with money and wealth sort of is what he denotes as the crux of the problem. Like, so why doesn't the government, when people just view money and wealth as synonymous, it's like, why doesn't the government just give everyone more money. Like if I had twice as much money, I could buy twice as many things. So like, why doesn't the government just give everyone more money? And this obviously comes to some problems. So, and some of the problems is that that to buy twice as many things, he points out, you would, just because you have more money doesn't mean you can't automatically buy more things. To have twice as many things, you would have to produce twice as much. So really what he's saying is that money sort of conflates like true value. When you just add money into the economy, you're just sort of shifting the value. So he then goes through another sort of, I guess, thought experiment to show this, which is, and what really happens is you have inflation. So he gives an example of like war contractors, because I mean, they had just gotten out of World War II. So you have the government give war contractors X amount of dollars to go buy supplies. So this is more money. So the war contractors have more money. So they then go buy more supplies from some store, and he calls it just store B. So they buy their supplies at store B. Store B then has higher sales, and so that means that they have more money. So they then go buy, buy more products from a different store. He just calls it store C, and this just goes on and on down the road. So what you have is that over the long run, sort of the inflation, the increase in money supply leads to an increase in product prices, like over the course of the entire nation. But what you get is that it is disproportionately affected. So the people that get the money first actually do have a true increase in their buying power, because you get the money before you have an increase in the price of the goods. So the people that get the money first get an actual true increase. The people that get the money last are actually substantially poorer.
Because the prices have gone up.
Right. So over the long run, everything sort of equilibrates where like, $2 today, if it bought, one hamburger, if you double the money supply, then after everything equilibrates, it's like $4 buys one hamburger. But the people that got it first at one point had like $4 and they could buy, two hamburgers instead of one hamburger. So they double. But the people who got it last are disproportionately poorer. And this sort of, I would say this sort of goes into the other notion that he sort of talks about is, the true notion in the argument, how I had heard it, is of, sort of money printing, and how money printing really, I think people think it benefits, the poor. We just give people checks. We just had all these stimulus checks. But in reality, I think, you maybe want to chime in on this and make sure I'm explaining this right. But in reality, it actually drives the wealth gap higher between the poor and the rich, because the poor people who are using it for goods will lose that money. And then the rich people who can save it will put it into assets, which then sort of inflate with the price of inflation. So they're actually getting more money, or their assets rise when they can buy their assets at a cheaper price, like not necessarily cheaper, but a lower dollar price, and then see that rise with inflation. Where the poor people just have sort of the price of goods go up. So this actually drives the wealth gap. Is that sort of explained properly?
I think I still don't fully get how the money's actually injected all the time, but yeah, a lot of times it seems like the government's artificially propping up companies, and through, bond purchasing, and then people, some sell their bonds and then they have extra cash, and then they go, put it in, assets, and they have exposure to the stock market and real estate. And, those get helped during the money printing. So yeah, it does. If the poor, if a poor person doesn't have exposure to those, they're going to miss out on how that initial money is getting injected into the economy. I guess with this part, I think Dalio talks about this a lot, but like just keeping in mind, like there's like a real economy, and then this like monetary stuff is like layered on top. Like you might have one person that makes pizza, one person that makes ice cream, and like maybe they just eat the other person's good all the time. So A makes pizza but eats ice cream, and B makes ice cream but eats pizza, and they're just trading back and forth. And let's say now that they only eat every other day, and they need money to do the exchange. Well, it doesn't matter if you have $4 for the trade or $100 or $1,000. The only thing that's getting traded is pizza and ice cream. And I think that kind of,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was a stupid analogy, but
No, I think it was good. So I mean the point is that like anything, inflation disproportionately affects one group, a subsection of the population for good, and then everyone else it hinders. And it just so happens that I think, these current stimulus packages, I think people think in the short term, they probably did help people. Like when they get that stimulus check, they probably did really help them. But in the long run, it's driving this wealth gap more and more. And I think that seems to be one of the biggest complaints in the country right now, is this huge wealth gap between the top 1% and everyone else. That's one of the driving factors. The other point he makes is that inflation also distorts production. And it sort of, what he says is it leads to an overexpansion of some industries at the expense of others. So, when you have inflation, you make it seem like these companies are actually doing better than what they really are. And this leads the companies to, expand, and then and sort of in many regards overexpand, because they view that the profits are higher than what they really are. And then when you try to sort of deflate or remove the inflation, what you have is all of these sort of assets that no longer have any really value because they were artificially propped up. And that was sort of an interesting point about sort of how it affects companies and not just like sort of the individual person.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had, so I guess the other point, I just had sort of really one more point, and then I just wanted to finish up with this quote. The last point is like, why does inflation continue? Like, why do people continue to propose, like in the government, like why do we just keep proposing to do inflation? Or like, why is it viewed as so good? And I guess it's easy to see, especially when you have a huge debt like we do. It's easy just to be like, well, we can just print money, and we can then just sort of erase our debt that way, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's an enticing argument. But I mean, sort of, I think what you talked about from the German wine mark is what happened. Like, their paper money became worthless.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that we're a little different than Germany in 1920. That was in the 1920s, correct?
Early, 20s, yeah.
20s. In that, I think other countries still rely on the dollar, but it is sort of the same, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah.
So that's one of the reasons. And then the other reason is just that people, I think it's sort of a psychological thing. People just think when they get money that they're better off, when they don't even really take the time to think about, has the price of living gone up? Like, am I actually better off? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you could if your rent's $20 a month and you make $100 a month, you're doing okay. But, if your rent's, $500 a month and you make $1,000 a month, like from just a number standpoint, I think everyone would say the person, that's making, 5 times the rent is probably better off. But from a psychological standpoint, I think, $100 a month and, monthly income is so low in today's standpoint, you're way better off in the first scenario. But I think a lot of people would take the second one. And then I just sort of wanted to end off with this quote he had, about inflation. So like every other tax, inflation acts to determine the individual and business policies we're all forced to follow. It discourages all prudence and thrift. It encourages squandering, gambling, reckless waste of all kinds. It often makes it more profitable to speculate than produce. It tears apart the whole fabric of stable economic relationships. Its inexcusable injustices drive men towards desperate remedies. It plants the seed of fascism and communism. It leads men to demand totalitarian controls. It ends invariably in bitter disillusion and collapse.
That was the same quote I wrote down for that chapter, I think.
Yeah, it's how he ended the quote, the chapter, and I thought it was pretty, a pretty good quote to end on. And
it's like true though, right? Because like I guess I'm speaking for myself, but I know if they keep printing dollars, I want to take out debt because the debt's going to be cheaper in the future.
Right. Yeah.
So, but it doesn't make me feel good. Like, I wish I could just like save and just like know that I can just have the money. I don't want to feel like I have to like outpace like the market or the economy.
Yeah.
Or like the average person.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't like the feeling.
Yeah.
But on the same note, it makes it attractive to do it. To just take out debt and, make it easier to pay off at the later.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things to think about is, like in these certain government policies, since it does favor one type of population or one segment of the population, maybe just to try to understand how that might benefit you if you could be in that segment and kind of, I don't want to, kind of like exploit the policy.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of what he's saying. It promotes speculation. Like,
yeah,
like the government wants you to buy things. So like, what's the best thing to buy so you can get the value, the inflation value added.
Okay. So I guess are we all done with that one?
That was all I had for that chapter.
Okay.
Did you have any other thoughts?
Not really. I think that was definitely the chapter I think that stood out from this book. I guess I'll wrap it up. I won't go too long, but there was I think this is fitting since we're both landlords, but like, what does rent control do to the economy? So I guess, let's do like an experiment, I guess. What do you get for your Water Street duplex in Michigan?
For one side I get $550 and the other side I get $435.
Okay. So let's say like tomorrow the government says like the most you can charge is $400. So like what are you thinking when they do that?
Well, I would be very upset.
So the land, go ahead.
I'm probably not going to, that would take away a wide swath of my profit margins. So I'm probably not really investing much more money in that house. So, if a pipe's breaking, I'm doing the absolute minimum to fix it.
Right. So that's, yeah. So, I mean, this was, I mean, the intent was good. I mean, they want, people to have affordable housing, but what happens when they put these restrictions in is there's no incentive to make repairs because, the landlord's profit is now capped. And, but the thing, and I see it in Vienna, and I've talked with it, about it with my girlfriend who knows this stuff, because she actually lives in rent controlled housing. But with a lot of the old buildings, they're all rent controlled, but new construction is not. So what you see is a lot of new construction because then there is an incentive to make nice things and have them not break and fix things when they do break. And you see landlords moving into that new construction, but there's still all this old stuff and there's no incentive to repair it because the landlords can't get higher rents, and because they've been getting less in rent, they might not even have enough to do the repairs if breaks happen. And actually, what you see in Vienna a lot, it seems, and Elena's a friend whose parents have some properties, and because they were rent controlled, they basically didn't think the reward was high enough, so they basically just sat on them instead of even having a chance of having someone like abuse the property.
But
So
like they didn't run them out.
they just didn't rent them out. So you see this like shortage. And then when one of the kids was old enough to move in, they moved into that. But yes, so basically the policy is hopefully, I mean, was targeted at helping poor people get housing in a lot of times. And you kind of end up with this shortage of housing and just, debilitating houses. So yeah, kind of interesting how that kind of backfires.
Yeah, so I just listened to this book called Dismantling America by Thomas Sowell, and he briefly touched on rent controls, and his opening statement was, it's funny how the cities, San Francisco, New York, with the highest rents are also the cities with the highest rent controls, and he just kind of ends at that.
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting point. He touches on that same thing that Henry Hazlitt touches on, that where you have this incentive to build new apartments instead of maintain old buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So shall we wrap it up? You got a favorite quote or message from this book that you want to pass along?
That quote I read for the inflation quote really stuck with me. I mean, definitely a lot. Just, I guess the message is, for me, was always to make sure to look at what the true message I thought from this book is, when you're analyzing a policy, you should think about what you're not seeing, instead of just what is the visual effect of a given policy. And you should think about what you're hypothetically losing, like what is not coming into existence because of this, and would that be better, or would that potentially be better?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the message of the book. There was a quote that I thought summed it up well. This was coming from chapter 15, how the price system works. They said, in studying the effects of any given economic proposal, we must trace not merely the immediate results, but the results in the long run, not merely the primary consequences, but the secondary consequences, and not merely the effects on some special group, but the effects on everyone. I thought that summed up the book.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a good one.
Yeah, so we haven't really done this much, but Hazlitt does mention a couple other books. So if you were interested in this type of stuff, I'll just mention three of them. There was Essentials of Economics by Faustino Baliv. There was Understanding the Dollar Crisis by Percy L. Greaves. And there was Free Market Economics by Bettina Bean Greaves. So, yeah. So,
yeah. Well, you want to take us out, or?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just reiterate, you can reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be guest host for a particular book you have in mind, a great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along to them. And we got some feedback that some of you would actually like to read along with us so you can hear the discussion after reading the book. So Al, what book are we going to read next?
The book was Into the Air, which was the book highlighting this Mount Everest climbing tragedy. So a little different from what we've sort of been focusing on, but I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's going to be a good one.
Cool. Looking forward to it. And I guess we will say goodbye. There's a great song we found. It's got a great guitar and recorder part, no lyrics, so just relaxing, and hopefully can be added to your reading playlist. And this is Sleepy Fish with Velocities. Bye.
Yep.